Okay, welcome to Unit 7, Video 5, Section 4, and we're going to start talking about the progressive movement. So, to recap where we are so far, we have talked about 3 different groups that showed that we can make progress, we can demand reform in the United States. We started with the farmers who pushed for the government to step in and help a group of people that needed more rights, needed to be listened to because there was too much control from monopolies, not enough attention being paid to their rights. And we had the Grange movement pushing for farmers and people, especially in the West, to get taken care of. Then we talked about the Populist Party, the People's Party, again demanding that we change in order to benefit the average person, the people, instead of big business bust up that relationship that had corrupted the government because of big business. Again, asking that the people's voice be heard and taken care of. And then we talked about the women pushing for rights to be listened to by a government that hadn't been listening to them. So we've talked about 3 different groups who have demanded that progress be made. We are going to talk how all of this comes together and gives us the progressive movement. The progressive movement is going to demand that we improve society and expand democracy. We have to improve society in order to fix all of the problems from the Gilded Age, and we have to expand democracy to get the government being responsive to the people instead of big business. All right, let's get a little bit of background. The progressivism is going to start in the 1890s. So, in the 1890s, we have experienced a lot of changes. Okay, we are in the midst of the end, have been experiencing for 40 years now, the Second Industrial Revolution, which created many social problems. These problems were brought on by industrialization, urbanization, and immigration. Okay, urbanization being that movement to the cities, immigration, lots of immigrants coming to the United States, industrialization, that change, advancement that was being made. Progressivism is going to be the belief that we need to make reforms to respond to the people. This is going to be very similar to the populist movement. Both are going to want to end the corruption of government officials. Both want to make the government more responsive to the needs of the people, and both wanted to eliminate the abuses of big business. This movement is going to be led by the middle class people, and they believed that political reform was an urgent need in order to solve the issues people were facing. If the government didn't step in here, then the people were going to continue to suffer, and that just cannot happen. So, what problems are we confronting? First, the progressive era brought together many different groups to cause reform. The groups that we are going to have are first women, which we just talked about in the last 2 sections of the notes, who are asking for the right to vote. We're also bringing together a group of people that want to create an honest government, because an honest government is a government that responds the best to the people. We also have a group that wants to come together to change government through reforms, and they're going to target political machines. Remember, political machines are those groups of powerful people that are manipulating the government to stay in power by forcing people, bribing people to vote, paying off different groups of people to stay in power. The These cities are going to be controlled by political machines that are keeping people in power who really don't care about the people they're supposed to be serving. They only care about those who are paying them the most, to turn a blind eye to the bad things that they're doing. Political machines whose bosses were using violence and bribes to influence voters. We want to get rid of that. And we have a combination of corrupt government and the fast growth of cities, which led to a lot of problems. Remember the problems that we talked about in the cities. We talked about the lack of sanitation workers, the lack of cleanup in the streets, the lack of regulation and crime. We had the tenement houses where many people were living in unsafe conditions because of the wages that they were getting paid, the small wages that they were getting paid. The falling down buildings with no safety regulations in them, no running water most of the time, the dirty streets causing disease to run rampant through the cities, the dangers of crime and fire. So we need to get the corrupt government to pay attention to what has happened in the cities by making the government less corrupt. The middle class progressives are going to demand that we bust up the trust to create more economic opportunity. Remember, trust is just a fancy word for monopoly. Okay, trust is just a fancy word for monopoly. The middle class wants to break up those big monopolies that had formed, which eliminated competition in order to allow for other businesses to happen, to allow for competition to grow, to give us a free market like we're supposed to have. They are also going to believe that the Sherman Antitrust Act was not enough. Remember, the Sherman Antitrust Act was just a paper tiger. The Sherman Antitrust Act said that no trust could restrict trade, and if they did, that's when the government would see them in violation of the law. Well, if you're a smart trust, if you're a smart monopoly, you want to be trading all over the place. So the Sherman Antitrust Act was too vague, very difficult to apply, and the people are starting to catch on and saying, this is not enough. We need to do something more to get rid of these abuses of big business. The problems that we want to solve also speak on the class system. Remember, we have a huge gap between the rich and the poor. We have such a large gap that the top 10% of the population controlled 90% of the wealth in the United States. That is a very small percentage of people controlling a very large amount of wealth. That gap between the rich and the poor needed to be reduced to create a level playing field. We can't have people who are billionaires and then have people who don't even have a toilet. Okay, we need to even out the gap between the rich and the poor. Spread the money, spread the wealth. Progressives would also use conditions of miners and factory workers, city slums, and child workers to push the movement. We are going to talk in the next video about this group of progressives that are going to push really hard to get change to be made to the United States. And in order to get that change be made, we had to get people to recognize that there was a problem in the first place. And a lot of people, a lot of the wealthy people, had no idea that the cities were as bad off as they were. And we have to get their attention to the issues, and we're going to have to use the extreme examples of the terrible conditions that the miners were working in, the terrible conditions of the factories, the absolute broken down pieces of the cities, and play on the people's emotions even by showing them child workers. Now, you might be thinking, Okay, well, they're just showing them what was happening. How is that a manipulation? It's not. They were just showing them exactly what was happening in the United States at the time and what needed to be changed. I want to take a look at the political cartoon on your screen for just a second. You can see at the front that we have two supposed to be representatives in the government pushing out reforms only to be followed by corruption. So we're rolling out reforms, but they aren't being held up because there's so much corruption. The corruption is just taking them away. So this is a great example of the Sherman Antitrust Act. We roll out this reform, but it didn't actually work, and we're rolling it back up with corruption and allowing that to continue. So it looks good that we're passing something like the Sherman Antitrust Act, but we need to do more to get rid of the corruption so that the reforms can stick. Which is exactly where we're moving the next time we get together to talk about the second half of this section on the progressive movement. We're really going to talk about the people who are boots on the ground, expanding democracy and improving society. Don't forget about your homework tonight and let me know of any questions.